Yeah, so like, I do that a lot.
Friend's house up out of the shower and to fill the water through some back into the we got a system. Today I had to put 6 boxes of counterfeit swivel foam bacon. Counterfeit.
Counterfeit stripple?
Counterfeit bacon, I mean.
Oh, okay. That was a good counterfeit lunch.
Image of the beast. Yep. That was the stuff that looked like
Everyone's gonna steal that phrase.
She's behind you like 6 first that stupid show.
England's only saying.
It was each one. Each one first bus for putting up with that. What's with the hand sanitizer?
In case you want to if you feel like you like to use it, it's there for everyone to use.
And bubbles?
Did you run out of bubbles?
Yes. You're so sweet.
You want to play with bubbles again?
Yes.
We really want to make this point memorable, right?
Yes.
Okay, we can play with bubbles. There's enough unhappy stuff going in the community. We can
Go do some Come on.
I'm officially solid.
What? Damn. All these people saying no to the joy of bubbles?
Yes.
Right? We're done with you. Bubbles.
Yes. Also that red.
Thank you so much.
Just Yes.
No, this is
Yeah. Yes.
I know.
It was so cold. I don't want to get like
So when you do this for something? Okay, if you had a purpose, I don't know.
like most people. Really? You're alright.
I can go back and give them like.
Yeah, for sure.
You choose not to. You always have a choice.
So I like know, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Still. You're just like super easy.
What do you think?
I have an iPhone too. I don't care what iPhone. Oh, the cool thing about the Pixel is that for the like cell phone service and stuff, you don't have a contract. I use Google Fi, so it uses whatever network is strongest. So I can use Sprint, Verizon, AT&T, and stuff. Yeah. And then it's $20 for talking and texting, and
Let's
$10
pray.
for every gig of
We'll
data.
be underway. Much is occurring around us. Much to be somber about in this count in the 3 to 4 counties here. Let's pray. We'll talk about this. Father in heaven, there are things that are hard to understand, and things that make us curious in different ways. And we are all in some ways affected when the people around us in our community and in neighboring communities are suffering. And we pray for comfort and courage and protection of those that are still needing to evacuate, and all of the firefighters and other rescue workers. We pray for their safety, and we pray for calm and peace in people's hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. Any of you impacted by the community's calamities? Any of you without any of your utilities, or your cell phone doesn't work, or something like that? Several of you? Yeah, we're without electricity, which means the well doesn't work, so that means also water. And all of our cooking, we don't have a gas range, we have an electric oven. Fortunately, we have a propane grill on the deck with lots of propane and lots of stored food and water, but we can't get internet and we can't get cell at home. And so we're kind of cut off, and I'm very nocturnal. It forced me to go to bed early, so I'm really upside down right now. I woke up, the dog barked at something, but normally I just go back to sleep. I think I slept for 10 hours, and the wrong 10 hours, be up at 7. What are you supposed to do at 7 o'clock? What is there to do in this world at 7 o'clock in the morning? Well, with Santa, you're supposed to be asleep at 7 o'clock in the morning. So it was outrageous. So I'm all upside down. We have to pack everything in a duffel bag and go up on campus to where we have friends that let us use their shower and fill some jerry cans. When I get done with class tonight, we're going to have to try to keep the garden from dying, so I'm taking several cans in my truck, watering the trees and everything.
Do you live up there in England?
Yes,
Because the fire chief just posted that the power's back up.
in England. Are you serious?
Yeah, just like 10 minutes ago.
Whoa, hope it's up on Blue Ridge Drive. Oh, that would be most outstanding, because it's been heinous.
Yeah.
Now Comcast needs, they're just looking for an excuse not to have to do anything. That's all they're doing. The Comcast said, until all of those fires have all the evacuation orders out, we won't let our personnel work in those counties. So that's just a way of saying, we'll get to it when we get to it. And my stepbrother works for Comcast. He's a engineer of some kind in Marysville area. He's not helping us here. They're not burning. Yes.
No, I just thought this was funny. I saw this thing on the internet at some point that says, how to solve America's drug use problem. Step 1, make all drugs legal. Step 2, sell all drugs through Comcast customer support.
There you go. Oh, I love it. That is perfect. We need some good cynicism today to go with it all. It's funny. In your readings in your readings for this course, in fact, if you dig around in some of the links that I gave you on the course website and in the syllabus, you'll actually find out that there's some people called the cynics, and that's an introductory philosophy thing to learn about. So you might want to look at, on your own time, who were the cynics really? Today we say don't be cynical, but what was a cynic? So when you find out, maybe on Thursday someone can tell us who the cynics were. I got a wad of Kurtzdollars for who. Would someone like to just volunteer to give a report on the cynics on Thursday? It's yours. Okay. So you find out who the cynics were in terms of early Greek philosophy. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the pre-Socratics that were they were the early sort of proto-philosophers from the Miletus area. They are therefore called the Milesians. We're only going to really look, we might talk about some more, but we'll only really focus heavily on 3 of the Milesian philosophers. That will be Thales, and Anaximanders, and Anaximenes. Okay? Thales is spelled Thales. Just like if you're going to say, hey, there's a sale down at the mall, and there's another sale going on at another mall, you say there are sales. Well, it's TH, Thales. So if you had a lisp, you might be the way you'd say sales. THALES, Thales, rhymes with sales. But that's not how you say it. We say Thales, all right? So Thales, and the next one is Anaximander. Anax, A-N-A-X. Mander. B-E-R. Right. And the next one is Anaximenes. And you start out spelling it the same way, all the way till you get to the M. And then it's E-S. Yeah, perfect. Anaximander, Anaximenes. Now, these Milesians were concerned, among many other things, with what was everything made of. Do you remember when we did the experiment, thought experiment, with the paper and the scissors, and I cut pieces of paper until I had it all over the floor, until I told you I was cutting down just one little tiny piece. Well, they didn't have the benefit of powerful scanning tunneling electron microscopes. And they didn't have the benefit of particle accelerators. And they didn't have the benefit of well-developed enough math so that even if they had particle accelerators, it wouldn't have done them any good to be banging protons together. Wouldn't do them any good at all, because even if we gave them all the data, they wouldn't know how to tell what that meant when the detectors on the walls of the particle accelerator detected particles. They wouldn't even be able to figure out how to calculate the mass of all of those and what in the heck that means. And they didn't know the mass of a proton because they didn't know it was a proton. But they thought and thought and thought and said, well, what is it all for real? I mean, what is stuff really fundamentally made out of? I mean, you can argue about where it came from all day. You can argue about what's going to happen to it all day. But when it's right in front of you, you kind of want to go, how does that work? What is it? I mean, what's stuff? And is stuff the same as other things? Other things you can talk about is the same as stuff, like people, or like a dream, or like work, like money, concepts. I mean, is stuff a concept? Is stuff really like stuff? So they talked about it, but they couldn't conduct any real experiments. They really didn't have a developed scientific method yet when these guys were born. But that first guy was not only an early philosopher, he was also an early natural philosopher. Now, natural philosopher is an early scientist. Scientists today, if we had taken a scientist and they were doing the things scientists do, and we transported them back in time to the Greeks in the 7th and 6th and 5th centuries BCE, we would find that they would be called natural philosophers. Even after philosophers got named, philosophers, they did busy themselves not just thinking about the nature of existence, but also finding out about the world. And we're going to find out that back then, philosophy was all of the scholarly or academic or intellectual disciplines, all rolled up in one. In fact, and I want you to know this, when we ask you for definitions of philosophy, one of the definitions or characterizations of philosophy is that philosophy is the mother discipline. All right? You'll hear from time to time people that are scientists that will say, well, we don't need philosophy anymore, we have science. Well, that's a very, very ignorant, very stupid thing when they say that. But they do. And some of the smartest, most popular rock star physicist, scientist types make that statement, that we don't really need philosophy anymore. We've outgrown philosophy, now we have science. Well, they're very, very ignorant. And for them to say that is identical to somebody who is religious, who says, look, I have all the truth right in my church and in my holy book and in our traditions, so we don't need other people's ideas. We surely don't need science. We surely don't need philosophy. We have the whole truth right here. You can't teach it from whatever, the Quran, or you can't teach it from the Bible, or you can't teach it from the Bhagavad Gita, then you don't need to be teaching it. Because it's just error. When we see these guys trying to figure things out, they're not like they're not going to have someone say, "Why are you doing that? You're not a whatever. You're not a marine biologist. You should try to figure out, cuttlefish. You're not an astronomer. You shouldn't be trying to figure out how the heavenly bodies are moving. Bodies are. You're not a cosmologist. You shouldn't be talking about the nature of the universe. You're not an optics person. You shouldn't be trying to figure out light. You're not a surveyor. You shouldn't be trying to figure out how to divide up land fairly, and so that when the whole basin floods, we want to find out once all the fences are gone and all the markers are gone, whose field is what field. They just did what needed to be done. They were just curious in general. They're sort of omnibus curious. And I'd recommend that to you, no matter what your field is, if it's physics or if it's theology. I'd recommend that you, who here is theology, by the way? How many theology people do we have? No one in the class is theology? What, do they prohibit theologians from taking this course, or what? How does it happen like that? It's frightening. I had to take it, or one like it. You guys should hold your pastors accountable, though. If you're Adventists, you should hold your pastors accountable if you find out that they're science ignorant. Don't let them off the hook with that ever. Tell them that in Testimonies to Ministers, that Ellen White says that if the minister used time wisely and responsibly, was a good steward of the pastor's time, that pastor would be mastering one branch of the sciences after the other throughout their whole ministry. And that they were responsible for that information, because people don't want narrow, ignorant pastors. They want pastors that have learned all of the areas that are available. Keep that in mind. One branch of the sciences after the next. Okay? Testimonies and ministers. Okay. So you hold your pastors accountable with that. Well, these guys didn't need anyone holding them accountable to be rounded intellects. To be like, we could say they were like Renaissance thinkers, but we hadn't had a Renaissance, that Italian Renaissance that we always talk about yet. That had not occurred. Thales did some cool things. I'm coming right to the edge, but I don't want to go too far, because I like three of you to have a chance to sort of give us their sort of biography. And I'll hire you for sort of a handful of Kurz, for a good wad of Kurz dollars. If three of you would be willing to, you can go on Wikipedia and you can hit the Stanford Dictionary of Philosophy. You could just Google them and see what comes up. You watch a YouTube and watch someone else doing an outstanding or a lousy job, and you can come back and do better. But, just 4 or 5 minutes. Just tell us a little bit about the sort of facts in brief about these guys' lives and some of the contributions. Would somebody like to do 1, 2, 3? Okay. You're up next when we have one. Okay. I won't forget that either. I will call you and say I got one for you. And if you don't want it, you can pass and wait till the next one. We can kick you in the office. Okay? 1, 2, 3. The 3. Can you keep track of who has it? Okay. Was it you? Would you like to have Thales?
Sure.
And who else was it? Was it you? Would you like to have Anaximander?
Sure.
And who was the third? The third. What would so you like the Anaximander?
Sure.
Okay. You want one too?
No, I'm just asking.
You got a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
So who are these people exactly?
These are pre-Socratic philosophers. That means they occurred before Socrates or Socrates. Notice that you know how we kind of say in marking history, we say before Christ and in the year of our Lord, Anno Domini, or we say, to be inclusive of people who aren't Christians, we say Common Era and before Common Era, instead of saying AD and BC. Well, nevertheless, it's marked with sort of the start of the Christian era, which is notable. Even when we're saying BCE and CE, we know that it was still established, pivoting the whole calendar of our chronology for the planet with the time of Christ. What's that?
The winners.
Yeah, good point. The history is written by the winners. That's right, by the people who win the war and deny all the other facts that would have put other people's perspectives primary. So when we talk about philosophy, we speak about pre-Socratic philosophy, then we speak about a Socratic era, and then we speak about philosophy after the Socratic era.
I just have a question. When did you want these turned in? Or, like, do you want them by the next class period?
Yeah, can you have something ready by the next class period? That'd be perfect. So we don't go too far away from it, because we're going to have to be moving away from these pre-Socratics pretty soon and start talking about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Oh, by the way, you all, let's see, you guys did a pre-test, and on there it asked you to give the birth order. Did it not? Of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle? Well, I just gave them to you in order. But you're going to never want to forget that. Some of you might have them in, well, I know for a fact some of you have them in a funky order. But I'm going to just give you a way to remember so you never have to forget, even if you forget who they even are. Because someone would say, can you give me their birth order? You could probably put them in order. You're not going to screw up. At least if they provide the names, even if you forget them, you'll be able to alphabetize them. I like to read and write philosophy sitting in a hot tub. That's my thing. That's a heinous image of a 55-year-old turkey meat white guy in his spa. Make a heinous image, and then the word spa, you can picture maybe all those pasty, rolly, nasty-looking pre-Socratics or Socratics or whoever, we're all just as man with no tan as I am. And you can picture those guys in the hot tubs.
But they were Greeks, so.
Yeah, I know they were Greeks. But Greeks are not too dark.
No, but
They're probably not as bad as this, I know.
So is the order Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle because of spa?
Spa.
Okay.
You got it. He's got it nailed. He's got an anchor. We have an anchor. Spa. You can just picture some heinous, pasty-looking philosopher. I know they were probably olive colored because they were Mediterranean. But this philosopher, this wannabe philosopher, sits in the spa with books about these guys and with actually a waterproof journal and a pen that writes when it's wet, or with a tough book. Actually, sitting right in the hot tub with a waterproof laptop. And yeah, you got it. Gives me full good Wi-Fi and everything. Sit out there, I have waterproof headphones. You know, I can listen to music. It's pretty slick. Waterproof wireless headphones. Anyway, spa. You don't have to forget. But I'd like to though just pull out one aspect of what these guys said that's on the same theme, because it fits kind of what we're building up. It's ancillary, their little biographical stuff, but we want to look at it. And there's more that they did than just this thing that I'm going to say. But just building on what we've been working on, and sort of you and I asking some of these questions like, what the heck is reality, what things are made out of? They were having these same questions. And so I want to look at some of these earliest actually called philosophers and see what they said things were made out of, okay? And how it is that things come to be constituted so that we have stuff. We have the things that our senses can experience, things that we can measure in different ways and see and detect. So thales, what I want you to remember about thales and the way that things are made up is that thales believed that everything was made out of water. I mean, think about it. Water, in a common experience, even growing up, you notice that water can exist in three states of matter. Okay? We won't get into, for some of you science majors, who's a science major of any kind in here? I'm going to put them up so I can see. So, now, hold them up. Those science majors, okay, if you're like pre-something, put your hand down. Okay, so you're going to be a scientist, right? You're not pre-something, you're a physics major. Yeah. Okay, you all are like biochem pre-med or chem pre-med or bio pre-med. Did I hit them all? Yeah. What other sciences did I miss?
Pre-farm.
Huh?
Health sciences.
Never mind.
Pre-pharmacy.
Oh, pre-farm. Yeah, okay.
I got it.
All right, good deal. And what's your major?
Spanish. Oh, sorry, biochemistry.
Biochemistry and Spanish.
Yeah, pre-med.
See. Huh. You're right, once been-
Yeah,
no, I
open
actually
it.
know not enough to make it arrest. Manos arriba. Yes, and I know how to release people at the release window too, you know?
How?
And I ask them all their stuff, and I know how to interview them with all, you know, ask them the information, and then I know how to give them a little lecture. No más encarcel. No más trabajo. Y no más drogas, no más tequila. Y su trabajo. Yes.
So, where is he?
I'm giving you my whole Spanish. Don't worry. We're out. We're done. That's all I have. No, I know how to say my stomach is sick and I need the bathroom too. Just from going to Mexico, just in case. Muy enfermo. My stomach is dropping. Yes. So Thales noticed, like you and I noticed, that water exists in 3 states of matter. And one reason I was asking about the science majors is I want to find out how many people even know what I was talking about if I said we're not going to get into phases, we're going to just stay with states. Does anybody know what I just said? Please, somebody know. I don't want to be that lonely. Okay, good. So the states of matter that he noticed that water demonstrates are it can be a solid because it can freeze and be ice, and it can be a liquid when it's at sort of regular temperature, like the kind of temperature where we're comfortable and don't die, and it can be a vapor, a gas, when it heats up enough and it's steam. And actually, it doesn't have to heat up that much; it just has to have enough time to absorb enough heat so that it starts to. Because if you leave it, it doesn't have to be that hot. It's still eventually it'll evaporate. It's just at room temperature. It'll even evaporate when it's cold. It just doesn't evaporate as quickly. So Thales said that the fundamental substance. So that's a good term to know. A fundamental substance. This is kind of like, what's the bottom line when we break it into pieces? You know, what's it made of? So he said it all boils down to water, and somehow. You know, cool, huh? I was going to come up with some steamy illustration. It's heinous, I know, but I'm without electricity. I'm having a shower in a strange shower and everything. So bear with me. It's COVID. Yes, much water, which I don't have at home. Although if the electricity's on, I'll start having water again because of well working. It's just a good day. So Thales was settled that it was water. But standing on Thales' shoulders, somebody who studied what Thales had to say, and what you could think of as a pupil of Thales. I don't know there's really like a follow him around kind of disciple, but somebody who did study Thales and had some knowledge of all of what Thales was saying and referenced where he worked. He started from what Thales said and then kept going. Was Anaximander. And Anaximander had a different description of what things are really made out of, and it's fascinating what the description was. We're going to return after we talk about the 2 that start with an A, and that almost start out the same at least. We're going to come back and look at Anaximanders because I want you to really, really do some business with Anaximanders compared to what we're kind of coming to today. And maybe in a few years, we won't be coming to that anymore. We'll have said, well, that was stupid. We found out where we went wrong and go a different direction. But for right now, the way we seem to be understanding stuff, we're going to really make some comparisons with Anaximanders and kind of, in your mind, put a place mark, a bookmark on Anaximander. Because Anaximander said that everything was not made out of water. He disagreed that everything was made out of water. He thought water was made out of something else, and so was everything else. So Anaximander believed that the primary or fundamental substance was something called the apeiron. Can you write that for us? A-P-E-I-R-O-N. Can you write it in Greek? Mm-hmm. Alpha, pi, eta, iota, rho, omicron, nu.
You?
Yeah, you know what? It's an epsilon, not an E.
Yeah.
My mistake. Sorry. I do it with a pen better than the mouth. It's hard to draw on the board with your tongue. Very good. Thank you so much. I'll give him a curse dollar for whatever that's worth. Of course, you've got 500 of them. I like this because it's a little mystical. The apeiron is kind of like I think some of you might want to look at the word. Oh, would you like to research that word?
Oh, sure.
Would you like to? It's going to be a little tough. I mean, it's a lot of digging to really get to it, but there are sources that will help you to come to this body of believing what the ancient Greeks thought about apeiron. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but I'll pay you really well if you can bring it home.
Well, when do you want to?
Let's for that. Let's go until a week from today. Is that enough time? Because it's a weekend. I mean, anything can happen on a weekend, right?
Do you want us to know the Greek name, or that's just
No, you don't have to know the Greek.
fancy?
I would like you though to have ever seen it. I don't want to ever treat you like with training wheels. I want you to. It's like I've never seen that kind of thing before. I'd like you to at least see it. That's why we're putting it on the board. And then when you run across that at some point, you might. I mean, even sitting there, you can say, well, that A looks a little like that other A, and the P looks a little bit like. You know what? That should be. It is a pi. You're right. That pi, we know the pi symbol anyway because of 3.1415 9265. You know. You're a physics major. How many decimals do you know it? Really?
No,
No.
It's a competition on the calculator.
Just
That's
do it.
that.
That's it. Okay. We have to have before the class is over. We have to have a little. Who knows pi further than that? Anyone geek out on pi? No, nobody.
It's good, you apple.
Raspberry. That's like when they have pi day on March 14th.
She got paused herself.
She's really entered into the spirit of this thing today, and she got me back. For all of you, you all should be giving her your.
I barely asked.
So, what you'll find, she's going to do a word study for us, but what you'll find is that the Greeks had sort of a mystical, what do we say, airy-fairy, woo-woo kind of a,
Is that the technical term?
yeah, woo-woo is kind of, yes. If you look up woo-woo, I don't even think you'll need to look in the Urban Dictionary. It's even used in scholarly literature sometimes, believe it or not. It's a way of saying like hoo-ha about people's, it's a way that materialists, that radical materialists, put down people who leave open the possibility of some stuff that we would think of in terms of the supernatural. I don't believe in the supernatural. I believe in miracles. I believe Jesus walked on water. He was born actually from a virgin. But I don't think any of those things broke any of the laws of nature. They're just laws that we don't usually figure out how to exploit.
According to Google, a woo-woo is an alcoholic beverage.
Oh, no, not that.
Come on, Dr. Kurtz.
Yeah, well, I know, but they're synonyms. Most words have first, second, and third. But it's kind of used when people start talking about like transpersonal psychology, or they start talking about maybe consciousness is connected somewhere in the. I've got to apologize for this one in the Akash. I got to there's somebody at school that's named Akash, but that's actually a term. It actually has a meaning in I think in Hindi, but that is a realm. The Akash is a realm where stuff is all kind of connected and is one, and it kind of manifests. The same thing manifests in multiple ways down in our level, in our layer of reality. But the apeiron was kind of like, if you look it up like doing biblical Greek, you would think of it in terms of the eternal, the infinite. If you memorize the word, you would have memorized it as the age, like this age, or infinity, eternity, that way. You would see forms of that word. But to the ancient Greek, 500 years earlier, and persistent even, in spite of what was done in terms of the religious Greek-speaking community, was this notion of containing infinity in like all of everything, of just all of time and existence, all like in one little nutshell, like something that contains it all. Sort of like when Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am." That would kind of get into that kind of days as 1,000 years kind of thing. So that was kind of a little magical to them, a little numerological, a little everything is made up of little pieces of infinity. That's kind of what it breaks down to, the way that Anaximander was saying it. So that when you break down everything, when you get down to the smallest piece and you look there, what's actually stored in the smallest little piece? Everything. Everything is stored in the smallest piece. Yes, one.
So this is pre-Socratic.
Pre-Socratic, yes.
Do people still, since this is so old, is it more of a foundation for the way people think now, or is it a way that some
people actually think?
Still, yeah.
Yes, it is a way that people actually think. Yes, it's a way right now that probably the cutting-edge physicists think right now.
Okay.
It's a way that
It's very familiar.
very serious. It feels familiar.
Yeah, because, well, at least a lot of philosophy nowadays
It's like that.
it's very reminiscent of like old philosophy now.
Yeah. Well,
Or all
part of it is that these guys had brains that are just unbelievable. They weren't really, but you take these three. They were standing on not this big tradition that we're standing on.
Mhm.
We didn't have these guys. I mean, they didn't have these guys. They were these guys.
Uh-huh.
They didn't have Einstein. They didn't have Heisenberg. They didn't have Newton. They didn't have libraries. I mean, they just thought. They didn't have any instruments to use to investigate the universe with. They were just thinking with their mind and taking commonly available stuff to observe, and then it's mind-blowing because we, for various reasons, most of them like religious or I'd say philosophical, but partisan reasons, like cultural reasons, we moved away from their beliefs and looked at it like they were stupid. We spent several centuries, especially after Newton and Descartes, we spent thinking that people that thought like that were a bunch of idiots. But the fact of the matter is that from that period, or even earlier, and on, in the Indian tradition, they always thought like that, and they still do. So the Western intellectual enterprise, through science, is coming back to that because when we exhaust what it's possible to even look at, because you get to a certain point, you can't look at something at all when it's so small that you can't, there's no way to discriminate it from anything else. And there is a certain size that things get where there's no such thing as a smaller scale. It's called a Planck scale. We would think that all of reality, like the fabric of the universe, is something that we can just keep looking smaller and smaller and smaller, figuring out a way to get a better microscope. But the fact is, when you get there, it's a little bit like when you use a microscope or a magnifying glass to take like printed material and go, wow, I wonder if I could see, like, make those stars bigger. What happens when you take something like this and I go, wow, that's so cool. I want to resolve it further. Like if I have a better telescope standing out in the observatory, I want to get a more powerful telescope, or we'll rely on an orbiting telescope. But what happens when I put this under the microscope? It gets pixelated. Right. What's it mean to be pixelated? What's that mean? Fuzzy. What else? Why does it get fuzzy?
You're seeing like individual almost frames.
That's right, because you're seeing little individual pieces that make it up and that we resolve into something that looks smooth and continuous, but it's not smooth and continuous. Like reality, we go, well, that's because it's fake. It's because it's printed and we don't usually use a microscope on it, and they didn't make it for us to make a microscope on it. Maybe they could have made it more careful, but what happens when we look at matter so far down that there's no way to look down any further? Not just we don't have a big enough lens, But we actually get down to where we found indirect ways to look at things, and we found that at a certain point, not just things, but the space that things are in, and even the time that those things exist in, gets to a point where there's no dividing things any further. Even time itself. Time itself gets to where you divide half of a second, fourth of a second, umpty gazillionth of a second. You get down there to what's referred to as a Planck second. And a Planck second is how long it takes light to travel a Planck length. And a Planck length is the shortest distance that exists. There is no such thing as an existence that's any shorter, because you can get something that's here and one thing that's Planck length away. There's nothing in between it. There is no in between it.
So
It's either here or it's here, and if you move it this way, it jumps to there, or it doesn't move at all.
So it gets to a point where there's no lines, it's just a point.
Well, if you think of it in terms of on a line, if you think of it on the timeline, yes, there gets to a point where it can't be described as a line segment. You can only describe it as a point, and a point has no dimensions, right? But it's in between that, there is nothing. There's nothing.
So
It doesn't
even
exist.
Beyond the dimension is just
It's like digital instead of analog.
okay.
Do you know how you got a knob that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, or you're setting something, but it doesn't let you do 1.1, 1.2. You get to the point where that's as far as you can go. Click, 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 click instead of smooth. It's not a rheostat, it's a digital selector. Reality, it turns out, now this is not something just, we're grateful to these guys, but I'm saying this is what we know from physics today. And space and time are not infinitely divisible. They get to the point where that's as small as it gets, that's as short as it gets. That's as brief as it gets. Period.
It's called a Planck.
Pardon?
Planck second, you say?
Planck.
Planck.
Yeah, from Max Planck.
Oh.
Planck, is that right? I think is that right? Planck, Max Planck.
Yeah.
And he figured that out. And it's not that long ago. I mean, in terms of the Western intellectual enterprise, it's just a moment ago, because it's just in the last century. I mean, my grandpa was born before they figured that out. I mean, that's darn recent. I've spoken to many people who could tell you of a time before we knew this from Western science. So anyway, these guys are pretty darn special, because some of the things they said that we said, yeah, right, we've come back to.
But isn't dividing everything down to one point like the opposite of infinity?
Well, we can think of it in terms of opposite, but the notion of the apeiron is that when you divide things down far enough to a small enough piece, what it's made up of is everything. And string theory has actually come to that also. In 11-dimension string theory, we find that you can magnify something, magnify it, magnify it, magnify it, and pretty soon you get to a place on a scale where when you look at something, you realize that you're looking at a superset of which you are a subset.
Like a fractal.
No, it's not
Almost
fractal. I mean, it
first.
might be a fractal pattern that you're looking down, but I mean, you get to the point in string theory today where when I go, there's some very tiny thing I'm looking at, I go, wow, look at this little tiny thing. And, but it's really a small scale. It's an outrageously, we don't see it, but it's just, when you get to the small enough, you go, so what's in there at the tiniest little piece? And you go, darn, our galaxy's in there. Because the discreteness of set theory breaks down in that when you get small enough. It doesn't stay logical building. It gets to where we're used to, if you got a superset and then pieces are smaller and smaller and smaller, you don't find a bigger set that this set is part of that's inside of a small thing. It's like in MIB. Did you see the movie MIB with what, Will Smith and
Yeah.
Tommy Lee Jones? that little pug dog has got that thing on his collar. Well, that thing is our galaxy. It's wearing our galaxy on his dog collar. And it's in the galaxy, but the whole galaxy is in it. That's what I'm talking about. And that was a play on string theory and those kinds of weird concepts. That's why they did that. It wasn't just some random cartoony thing. They were trying to make the point of plausible.
So a jiffy is actually a unit of time. I just, like, when I was looking up,
Yes.
it says jiffy is also.
Yeah, I recall. I don't remember an exact notation, but yes. And it also, do you remember, Jared, do you remember Planck's scale? Is it to the negative? Is 10 to the negative 73rd? Is that, I can't remember. Can somebody look up what is
44.
44? So 1 Planck length is 1 point. It's not 1, but meters. What is the fraction of a meter?
5.39 times 10 to the
Times-
44.
Okay, 5.39 times 10 to the negative 44, which, by the way, that's not 44 times smaller. That's outrageously small. It's outrageously small. But taking the speed of light, that's how far light travels in 1 Planck second. Or you could say a Planck second is how long it takes light to travel that far. And that is as small as it gets. There is nothing smaller. I mean, not just theoretically. I mean, it just is. There is nothing that small.
So
I mean, smaller.
that's like the first, if we can like put it in relative, so that's like the first tick of a clock.
Yeah, it's the smallest that a clock could tick. But that happens to be the clock that the universe is timed on.
But before that, it's just
And here's the weird thing.
anything.
Every point in space has its own clock. Except when it interfaces with
And that-
light.
Is that with
When
like,
when it
Einstein's thing?
interfaces with light, everyone experiences a single photon the same way in the reference frame. But other things move with, so light is moving, we're in reference to light, it's not in reference to us. But to us, we're all on a different clock.
Is that like relativity, right?
That is relativity. Well, it is a part of relativity. I could take all day and explain relativity and not cover it. If we had if this was only a course in relativity, we would barely even get the training wheels put on, let alone take them off. It's tough, and you can't see relativity really until you get. It takes about 3/4 of calculus, and then about almost 3/4 of physics with calculus before relativity. I mean, you can say parables, but you don't get relativity, right? Right. At least for me, that's what it took. So. I mean, I read books on it before, but it's like, yeah, 1, 2, skip within the minute. You read stuff and you think you get it, because, I've seen that word, but you don't get it. And even getting it mathematically, we don't really get it. There's things about it that aren't gettable. Just like in quantum mechanics, which is sort of in tension with relativity. In quantum mechanics, we find that there's things that there's no way for us to get. We talked about quantum mechanics the last couple of weeks, where we said things like, what things are actually made out of aren't really things. They're relationships, they're energy, Think about this. If you take something that you could describe as a noun, some noun that has some substance like desk, or rock, or something like that. It's like if we cut it into enough pieces so that we get so small, we find out that the smallest thing that it's made out of is a verb. That's what it's like. But what's a verb? It's an action word. I can walk, I can run, I can swim, I can throw. It's something you do. You can swing, can do a number of things that are doings, When we had the slinky out, the wave going back and forth is a verb that the slinky, the noun, is doing. It's waving. So when we find out that everything is made out of just sort of verb or relationship, like, hey, Here's the way I relate it. But there is no thing. Things are not really made out of things. And Anaximander said, things are made out of the apeiron, the ineffable is one way you could translate that, okay? You might want to write that word down because that might be the closest single word that you can use in English. And I know that's not what you call that when you look it up in Arndt and Gingrich, right? If you look that up in Arndt and Gingrich, it's going to say the age, or it's going to say, when you use it in the adjectival form, it's going to be like eternal. Very closely related. Very closely related, yeah. There's an overlap. But Ionios, well, same thing, yeah. This will have some more to it. Can you look this up on an online, if it's even in the New Testament? But Arndt and Gingrich doesn't only use the New Testament, looks at the classics. But if you don't have an Arndt and Gingrich, you want to find one used on Amazon. Okay, Arndt, A-R-N-D-T, Arndt and Gingrich lexicon. If you don't have the hard copy of that, you're going to want it, unless you can find it digital, which I don't think you can. So, being made up of the ineffable, of sort of like all of infinity is what is the little tiny pieces, but it is made up of little pieces. It's just that the little pieces are ineffability. And Anaximenes rejected his teacher's idea about what things are made up of. So the third one, Anaximenes, said, that's a bunch of hee-haw, woo-hoo, woo-woo, whatever you want to call it. It's a bunch of like mystical crap. He said, nonsense. It's air. It's all made up of air. Okay? So he believed that air was the fundamental substance, and he actually bridged the discussion. He is a bridge point to broadening the discussion and changing the nature of the discussion and trying to figure out how things are made, what's reality fundamentally of making up the stuff and how it gets made up. He took us to another level by explaining a process, not just what's it made of, but what's it doing. And that's important because what's it doing, it turns out, is what it all is what it's doing. I don't know if you've ever heard of a Bose-Einstein condensate, other than the fact that I mentioned it last week or the week before. But a Bose-Einstein condensate is something that Einstein and a researcher by the name of Bose said simultaneously, and then they collaborated, that because of relativity, Einstein said that if you could cool anything down, make it cold, take the heat out of it, to the point that it approached just before it got to, so as it almost was absolute zero. Oh, because, by the way, heat is one of those things that you can get cold, but you can't get colder. And it turns out that if we expand the notion of what cold and heat is, right? If we expand the notion of it, yeah, you can start measuring in something lower like negative kelvins. But for now, if we use the conventional definition of heat, which is the motion of everything, typically what would be mostly van der Waals motion, yes? It turns out that the little pieces that things are made out of, when you force them into smaller and smaller spaces, they react by moving more and more and more. And the smaller you get, they move more and more and more. And when you confine them because they don't like to be confined for some reason, they want to just be probabilistic. And when you start saying, well, they're definitely in here, they start moving all over the place saying, like heck. And they get more hyperactive, like little kids in a classroom. You say, okay, sit at your desk and don't move. Then they move in new ways. That's the way real pieces of real stuff is. So the notion, though, of a Bose-Einstein condensate says that when you get so close to 0 Kelvin, or negative 273.15 Celsius, which is absolute zero, then it starts acting not exactly like regular matter. And if you could get it to zero, which you can't, but if you could get it clear to zero, it wouldn't be matter. It wouldn't be there. And even when it's a Bose-Einstein condensate, it kind of phases in and out of material existence. It can just kind of not be there, or it can forget where it was supposed to be and show up over here. Literally, you can have it show up outside the flask and then phase back in without. I mean, it just starts breaking the rules of reality, which really gives some credence to some of these bizarre ways of describing reality in the extremes anyway. But this Bose-Einstein condensate shows, since if you get it cold enough, it doesn't have a material existence. That's showing us that the material existence is fundamentally its motion.
How do you get to that conclusion?
In the laboratory, it's been demonstrated. You can watch a video of it happening on YouTube. You can actually see it. It doesn't have to be some little microscopic portion. You can have a whole flask full of stuff and get it to within a few gazillionths of a Kelvin of absolute zero, and it just phases out of existence. You can just see it before your eyes. Raise your hand. Is that you, or is it you? Somebody had their hand up.
I just raised my hand up right now. What if all this is like a God is just like leading us on a wild goose chase?
Why would he do that?
I don't know. Just so we don't figure out anything.
It's a good question. At every step, at every significant and sort of graspable step forward, it's interesting that the temptation has been to question whether God wants us going to that level of understanding. When I was a little tiny boy, I remember hearing the grown-ups saying God wouldn't let us go to the moon, because that means we're not actually confined to the planet. And that was a major theological struggle for some people. And they believed that when there were some accidents in the space program early on, that God had caused the accidents. That he wanted the astronauts to blow up, that he had done it. Because stay in your place. I told you to go to your room. And don't come out until I say, you ate the fruit.
Oh, God, right
Stay there.
Oh, God, right there.
The parental God. I mean, sometimes you have to have a timeout when you're a kid, and if nobody gives you boundaries, then you end up. Think about the Tower of Babel. The whole story of the Tower of Babel, where human beings were building a tower. I think that the notion that all they were doing was just building Trump Tower, or that big tall building in Dubai or Malaysia or whatever. I think it had something to do more than, I think that their technologies in that story were getting to the point there where human beings weren't ready to have those technologies.
What kind of technologies?
I don't know. But they were saying, I will be like the Most High. I mean, maybe they were very similar to some of the technologies that were right on the border of right this minute. Right this minute, like figuring out the code so that we deprogram dying and getting old. We're at that right now. That'll probably be an option for you and me. It's not 50 years from now. Being able to figure out how to just will things into existence, arranging matter so that we can just have things show up, Like, not just like on Star Trek Next Generation when Captain Picard said, tea, Earl Grey, hot, and the replicator made it show up. But it wouldn't have to be in a little box, a little thing. It could be swarms of little nanorobots that are always following us around, each of us. And when we say in our mind that we want something, we don't have to verbalize it, just think about it and then sort of hit return in our mind and it appears. And we can express how that would be done. It's an engineering problem because pretty much the science is lined up. So now it's an engineering problem now. Maybe that's what they were getting to.
So has the line crossed where we are almost starting to take off then?
Well, no, but yes, in the way that people think of God. But I think for people who believe in God, especially for people who love God and they're dedicated to Him, all of these little steps are an opportunity for us to say, gosh, that must mean there's way more to God than just those parlor tricks. I mean, it's a beautiful theological moment. Because what's the people that are threatened by it have got a little impotent God. They got a little reachable God. And we want a reachable God, because if it's not reachable, it's like, well, shoot, what's it got to do with me? You know, we were like this notion that it's, you know, it's not just Santa Claus on TV. We can go to the mall and sit on his lap. You know, and say, I want a Slinky. Right? So then he's like real, and he says, ho, 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 you've been a good little boy. And that's a lot nicer image than something that's disembodied and is a principle or whatever. It's not very intimate. We want to think about it in a way that gives us a sense of intimacy and comfort. Because we have a tendency to think when something isn't a lot like us, that if it's different, to the degree that it is different, it is less than. But we're not saying, well, yeah, God is capable of that and jillion times more. I mean, picture yourself. What if we could make it so that you could be more than one place at once? Oh, well, we already have. So I can go on a webcam here, name a country, we'll fire up my webcam app, and we'll go there and be there. And, you know, pretty soon, we're going to be able to have social media so that people can decide that they want to, like, find somebody and agree to trade consciousness that day, and you'll be experiencing what their senses have, and they'll be experiencing what your senses have. And like I said, this is only an engineering problem now because it's already been demonstrated that we can do it.
So like we said, I think it was last class when we said, with kind of like that first discovery, kind of like the wheel or fire, we've been on like a track towards something, right?
Yeah.
So,
and here we are.
Like what you're saying with social media is like with the beginning of, say, like MySpace.
Yeah, we're there. If we
Then,
describe what you have today in a classroom here at BC, when I was in the classroom as a student, the reaction would have been, God's not going to let it get to them.
Then you add the fact that try as you might to deactivate anything, it's never going to truly be deactivated. It's just a ghost. It's just hidden.
Because it was always a fact. Everything that always was is.
Speaking from experience.
Yeah. And now it's like that. Put up some photos and then get embarrassed about them and find out that, oh shoot, I didn't even post that. See how fast we can get it back.
Okay, so you were saying about the Tower of Babel, how it was possibly the amount of technology that we have now that they had then. So
Or the amount that we're approaching.
yeah, okay, so do you think there might be something like that coming up now?
I don't know. David Brin, the person who wrote the novel The Postman, that the Kevin Costner movie The Postman was made about. I don't know if you ever saw that movie The Postman. It's a post-apocalyptic thing. Well, the author of that came to the 2011 Singularity Summit in New York City. I was there. In fact, I was right in the front, and afterwards spent a good part of an hour with David Brin talking about the issue. And he tackled the Tower of Babel. He did a Bible study for this group of people, assuming that everybody there was probably an atheist. He did this big Bible study about the Tower of Babel. And he took The Better Angels of Our Nature, Steven Pinker's book, the MIT scholar, psychologist, linguistic psychologist. He wrote a book showing that human violence and inequality has been diminishing really, really drastically, including still diminishing drastically. And we're actually getting more egalitarian and kinder to each other, and we're just becoming that way, better. And hard science to show that. And so David Brin used Steven Pinker's material saying, look, we're getting to be less gross to each other. Now people all over the world can get an education, even in places that have never even heard of education or the outside world. Now we have vaccines. Now we are trying to put everyone online so they can have the same access to all the information the world has. Because that's, you know, you can have money and everything, but the information is the money. It's synonymous. You can turn it into it if you just a little effort. Once you give people the information, they have the information. Everything's made of information. So David Brin said, how many of you are parents? And most people there put their hand up, and he said, okay, well imagine your kids, You come out, your kid's 4 years old, the kid's got a sex manual or something, or they've got your keys to your minivan and they're heading out to go down to the mall, and they're 4. So you're going to say no, but then if you find a kid with the keys, and they're heading out to the van, and they're starting it, and it's in reverse, and they're going down the driveway and get in the mailbox, then you're going to put them grounded. It's going to be something where you're going to really keep the keys away from that kid for the next 12 years. So he said, okay, well, let's just say that man was getting technology, certain technologies that were very godlike. But they were brutal. And there was no way that they would be able to ever talk about how to use them in any way other than ridiculously. So he said, what if that's what happened? God said, nope, take that away from you, go to your room, confuse your languages, whatever. But then you get to a point where you're not so heinous. And people are going, wait, we should put the brakes on some of these things. It turns out that the very people who developed CRISPR technologies, the CRISPR-Cas9 gene programming technologies, if you want to call it that, immediately called for an international Congress to sort of set boundaries and curtail it, because it's been like a year and a half now that it's been really in fairly refined form so that it's immediately useful. But people are going, let's be really careful and talk about this. They invited people that were stakeholders. They invited ethicists. They invited theologians from different perspectives. They invited physicists. They invited government regulators, saying we need to have some verifiable ways that this doesn't just get used to make heinous biological weapons or to create powerful warriors without any concern for their lives. So his point was made, and that was clear back in 2011. It was October 15, 2011 that I met him. And I'm not saying that that's what's happened. I'm just saying it's an interesting discussion. I'm also not saying that the Lord doesn't want us to get to these points. Do you remember that it says that knowledge would be increased? Right? It wouldn't, before the end, knowledge would be increased.
But to what point?
Remember in the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Wasn't there some relationship where God said, I won't have man to eat of this fully, because then they eating of it, it would be like us. Knowledge. Is that weird? Did you have a hand up, George? Was it you that had your hand up? Somebody back there had their hand up. Was it you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So entropy is that, so when you say we're getting nicer to each other, do you think that that's a result of entropy just playing its course out and us?
Entropy, I don't know that it's fair to speak of entropy at that social level.
Mm-hmm. So
It would be like,
the analogy of the milk and coffee eventually becoming one thing.
yeah, but socially we speak of it sort of like a parable, but it doesn't, you can't count on the science of entropy.
Uh-huh.
Entropy has been challenged within complex systems theory by the notion of self-organization, which is another worldview we can get into later. Jared?
You were saying that the ancient philosophers were getting to the point we are with quantum mechanics and stuff?
Well, they were getting to the point with figuring out what things are sort of comprised of, some of them at least, that we're getting to with our technology.
Yes.
Do you think they had any idea of things like antimatter or dark energy or things like that?
I don't know. You see, we have nothing that these guys wrote. We only have 9-hand fragments and other people saying that they were into some cool stuff and said some cool things. So what they actually were into, I think their minds might have challenged any of the minds today, and they might have actually intuited some things that we have to struggle, that our brightest minds have to struggle to just understand the concept. these guys might have intuited them. I mean, the fact that they were able to come up with some of what they did come up with was like, what the heck? So, I mean, think about people. We do have people that are such super gifted people that they intuit calculus. It's already in the species. And by the way, think about Leibniz and Newton simultaneously without any contact with one another, and really no math to stand on the shoulders of. I don't think you can argue from arithmetic and Euclidean geometry that of course calculus is the next step. That's a fraud. It's its own thing. And they came up with it at the same time. So people who believe in the Akash, that believe that there's this collective consciousness, like Carl Jung, the psychologist Carl Jung, who was a student of Freud's, he believed that there was a certain sense where our consciousness sort of meets at the top in more dimensions. And so that explains why people kind of come up with stuff on other continents that don't talk to each other about the same time. And once they come up with it, other people start intuiting it, people more common. It just starts, okay, now it's in the species. Without any contact. And it even apparently, some claims are, it works not just with humans, like the 100th monkey syndrome. Some of you that are really fascinated, when you Google or YouTube the 100th monkey, you've got to, whenever there's something really, really out there like that, you're going to find the bulk of the things you're going to look up are going to be people say, oh yeah, that's been debunked. There's people who need to be a little more curious because everything that doesn't fit with what they currently believe, they explain it to the best of their ability. They explain it away and then say, see, I debunked it. That's not how you debunk something. When you really debunk something, you make something to be impossible. You don't just show that you didn't show it when you try to replicate it. That doesn't debunk anything.
So is that like Industrial Revolution?
So we need to rebunk some things.
Like Industrial Revolution is like the 100th monkey because everybody picked up on it and was like,
Well,
we need to be doing this.
There could have been some 100 monkey phenomenon going on there, but it's possible that we had kind of communicated most of those ideas and started collaborating. But without collaboration, the 100th monkey comes from this notion with some monkeys that were closely related species. They might even have been the same species, but they were actually on different continents or something. And they loved sweet potatoes, but they hated when they get sanded. Like when you try to eat an egg salad sandwich or a tuna sandwich or whatever at the beach, and then you go on crunch with sand in it, which is just really heinous. So they hated it, but so what they would do is they'd give them these sweet potatoes, and they'd get the sweet potatoes in the sand, and they hated that. And then it's like, I'm not eating that. They try, and then they say, forget that. They want to clean sweet potatoes. Because they don't like the grit in their mouth any more than we do, because it's probably not good for you to eat sand too much. So one of these monkeys got the notion, I should go down to the water, I should wash this off, and then I can eat it. But there's this, like, they've never seen that behavior before. They'd seen them give up on it, and for generations. But once one of these monkeys got that, it wasn't just the monkeys who saw it, oh, I'll copy that. It was like, all of a sudden, okay, now that's available to monkeys in other continents. That's the 100 monkeys.
Okay.
Oh, you want some weird stuff? Look up the study of crystals. And what happens when crystals of a certain compound get formed? Anywhere, when they get formed, like this is a real problem for drug companies. Because when you prepare a compound and it forms a certain form of crystal, who's a chemistry major here? Oh, please? Biochem. Are you chemistry? Good. So you know about crystals, or you're gonna soon. So it turns out that crystals can organize themselves into, if you have ochem, you know what a conformer is? You know how things can be like this, or it can be like this. If you have a little bendy box, you can make the same thing and bend it one way, bend it another. So there's all kinds of energetics or relationships or conformer. Why isn't a conformer one way instead of another? So turns out crystals can be different shapes, even though they're made of the same thing. Like anhydrous crystals of this or that, whatever. You played with it in GChem lab. Or you're gonna. And so you get a crystal that this shape is really important, say, for absorption or for its efficacy when it gets into your bloodstream or finds its way to your brain, where. And it's really important. But one day, at one of the labs in the world, say there's 5 or 6 labs on different continents that make this compound that has always formed this crystal. One day, when you put it together, the crystal now consistently takes a different shape, as with all the other labs that day. Does that give you goosebumps? Because it's true. Look it up.
Each college they go.
Why does it do that? Is there something where there's some forces that are like on the planet that are all universal? Is it magnetic? What the heck? Well, nobody knows. All they know is they don't like it when it happens, right? So there are weird things like that, and there are people who start out with their religion to say those things aren't true. Anything that's weird like that that doesn't fit their sort of billiard balls, hitting billiard balls into other billiard balls like Newtonian or Descartes or Cartesian physics, they're going to be against it. And they're going to start out saying, I know that's not true. I will, just give me a minute, I'll prove it. And then they try to replicate it and they can't. And then they say, oh, see, that proves it. That doesn't prove it. Because things, strangely, don't always happen consistently, especially with quantum mechanics. Yes?
Okay, this makes me think of a
Right.
conversation I had with my friend. After you said that entropy doesn't go with evolution, I brought that up to him. And he found an article that contradicted it,
Right.
saying that
Self-organization.
yeah, like
Mhm.
like it has to be in a closed system or something.
That's
like
right. But it's an open system because it's a biological thing. But the same person will say that our universe is a closed system. Try him on that and say, okay, then our universe, if it's open, if we're talking about open systems, maybe our universe is open system. See how that goes. Because if it's not open system, well, we got some magic or some god or something. You were having your hand up too, Colin.
I was going to ask, what do I look up to find the crystal thing?
Crystal structure. How about crystal structure dynamics or whatever? Just look up crystal structure. You'll get to the discussion. You'll find that it's well, just study crystal. Just study crystals. Crystallography. I don't mean like the New Age crystals where they sell crap that you can make a lamp out of and it makes you have like pinkness in your soul or something. I mean the actual crystals.
So when the crystals change, can they make them the way they were before? Or
Sometimes there are cases where they've never been able to get them to do it. And it's heinous. It'll make the efficacy of the drug go to nothing or to half or to 2/3 or something. Be right back.
Do you have a theory of why that happens?
Do I have a theory of why that happens? No, I don't think I have a theory. I wouldn't be called a theory. I have some speculations that there are connections to things actually, that it is, that what, that everything is actually, that every single little thing, when you go down to the smallest parts, it is everything. So if everything changes, it's going to affect everything. But no, I wouldn't call that a theory. I would just say I'm just, no, it's that has special degrees after its name too, you know. That has to have a license to be itself. I'm careful with those terms. Those are technical terms. A hypothesis and a theory are already taken for a very serious enterprise. And so I'm really careful not to use those loosely. I'm just speculating. I'm just smearing BS around. That's all I'm doing.
Could Murphy's Law just, could that explain it?
Well,
Or is that a cop-out?
Murphy's Law is just a fun cynicism, a cynical joke. It's not true.
Why not?
Because he was just kidding. It's just a joke. It's like for a coffee table humor joke. You buy it at Spencer's, not at a science bookstore. It's fun, but it's not true. There's no really Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law is if anything can go wrong, it will. And then at the worst possible way, at the worst possible time. And this guy, what he did was he had his students put peanut butter jelly on sandwiches, on bread, and then sort of toss the bread and count the number of times that they landed on the carpet face down. And they compare that to landing on the tile because it's not as big of an inconvenience to land on the tile. So when it makes the most mess, then most of the time then it lands that way. But if you do it on the tile, it's sort of 50-50.
Sorry, I feel like went on a tangent. So
We are, but it's related. It's very much what we're here for. Anaximenes, as we said, departed from Anaximander by saying that things were made out of air. Not this ineffable, not the apeiron, the infinite substance, but it's just a matter of air. But remember I said that he changed the nature of the discussion. He took it to another level because he's the first one that gave sort of a process. We could say, well, it's made of that. Really? How? He said, I have a way. So he said that air I'll get these out of order, like rocks and dirt and all that stuff, and then you can have like liquid, and you can have like gas. But he had this whole taxonomy where he'd take all the stuff we know of, like the earth, wind, and fire kind of thing, the Greek elements that they thought things were made out of. You take everything that he needed to explain and sort of put it in a list. So you're going to find various lists. If you look it up one place, you look at one book, it'll give different examples of what he ranked things. But for the most part, what he said is that when you go up the scale and you add heat, you're causing things to be like further apart. They become more ethereal and less dense. And he called that rarefaction. Rarefaction. And as you go this way, things get close together and they get solid because they're compact, they're compressed. And when you compress things like rocks, steel, or they didn't have steel, but iron. I don't know if they had iron. Do they have iron? When was the Iron Age? When did we get iron? Someone look up the Iron Age. I don't know what that was. But anyway, they had metals. So they had things that were really dense and really, really hard. So he called that condensation. Can you see how that's similar to what Thales said with water, making the three states of matter? But Anaximenes added this. What was the process? Well, the process is things are getting closer together or further apart. They're getting condensed or they're getting rarefied. Rare meaning further apart. If you were traveling across the outback in Australia, you would say gas stations are really rare. But they're not rare when you're driving in the suburbs in Sacramento. They're not rare. There's a gas station every 250 yards. But when you get to some places, you say the sign says next gas 73 miles. You're going, oh, geez. Then gas stations are really rare. So whatever the pieces of stuff were, whatever it's made out of, well, air, little pieces of air, they get rare when they spread out. And they get condensed, like being in the city, when they get down, condensation. So that's what Anaximenes said things were made out of. I want you to picture, though, that you've never had a science class. You've never been able to watch the Discovery Channel or goof around looking at obscure 3 o'clock in the morning science on YouTube. You don't know anything. You never saw Bill Nye, the idiot science guy, or anything like that. You never listened to...
She said, I'm personally.
Oh, yeah, he's an idiot. Bill Nye, the science guy, is an idiot. Yes, and he's going to your representatives trying to demand that they take children away from their parents if they teach them that there's a God and that He created the universe. He's trying to get lost.
Somebody's triggered.
That's an idiot. I mean, if parents want to teach a bunch of weird stuff, that's their thing.
How does that bother him, though? Why does that affect him?
It's affecting him like it's against his religion. I mean, that's a very good question. How could it affect him? Well, He's an evangelist. He's a very fundamentalist evangelist for what he believes. He argues by saying, we know better. There's some people who become militant about their atheism. They're not agnostics. They're not like curious. They're like people from Westboro Baptist with ever reconsidering what they believe. They're like fundamentalists of the Bible Belt. Richard Dawkins is another one. Wrote some really important things, contributed some things that are really valuable to the intellectual enterprise. But you listen to the person talk, and it's like, are you really reasoning like that? I mean, just remove the content of what they're saying and look at the process. Whoever they are, whether they're Bible-thumping Christians or whether they are Bible-burning atheists. When you have this notion that you already know, and the people that disagree with you are stupid, so you want to take it. I refer to myself as a humilitant. I bought that domain, by the way. So if anyone wants to buy it for me for $10,000, I might consider selling it, but I'll probably develop the site a little bit. But I consider a humilitant to be somebody who says, look, I don't know. And I'm really convinced that other people don't know either. But if somebody else says they know and takes away someone else's right to disagree with them, I'm going to stand in their way. So that's what I consider a humilitant. I'm not standing in their way because I disagree with them, because I think I know better, because I don't know. But I will not stand by while somebody bullies somebody just because they say it louder that they're right, and try to take away people's right to believe it and teach their kids, because that's forced manure. So I am really touchy about people that try to take away other people's right to be curious and to look at something that disagrees with them. We need to honor people that disagree with us, but we do not need to honor people that try to take our right away to disagree. We need to stand in their way. And it's interesting because believing that we should do that is a belief. And yes, I would be willing to push that. That's where I draw the line, where I would be willing to push my beliefs on someone else. My belief that we should all have a right to our own curious pursuits about where things come from, to make the claims that people make honestly, to give the authority like it's just a given to the whole Darwinian model. First of all, when someone teaches evolution today, they're not teaching it the way Darwin taught it. Not a chance. And most of the time, when you ask your friends, ask them honestly how well he knows Darwin's writings. You know, if your friend's a skeptic like that and a Darwinian, just when people are that, they ask him how well he really knows Darwin's life and Darwin's belief. Darwin was a theist. So was Newton. The guys believed in God.
I thought Darwin ditched that one.
Darwin, it's again one of those things where we need to be careful how we define things. Darwin ditched his affiliation with a notion of God. There's a difference between God and my idea of God.
Oh.
And then there's like organizational agreements with God. But when you talk about somebody transitioning, realize that the model and the things that we're reading from that person were written even during a time where the person didn't even ditch his childhood faith. Most of his writings, he hadn't even changed yet. And toward the end, much like people say that Einstein was not a theist, that Einstein was an atheist, and then people quote him as saying, well, math is the language with which God has written the universe. It turns out that what happens when people consider throughout their life what is likely theologically, it changes and it grows. Sometimes they come to a point where they say, I think my idea of God has changed so much that what people call God, I don't believe in it like that. But if you say, is there some infinite intelligence? Very many people will say, yeah, there's something. I don't know what the nature of that is. It's not. I don't think it's like I would get in Sunday school or Crater World Sabbath school or anything like that. But there's something. Like, take Michio Kaku. You know who Michio Kaku is? A Japanese rock star physicist. He's a contributor, major contributor to string theory. He's on all the. He's like an expert for the news media and all that now. But he, 2016, in about June, he came out and he said, this didn't happen by chance. All of this, it can't. There has to be intelligence behind it.
So what you're saying is Darwin and Einstein never claimed to be atheists?
Not to say that they didn't believe. Even people sometimes who become agnostics do not get to the point where they say, I'm committed to the fact that, it is my belief that there is absolutely nothing intelligent beyond us, like that. That's actually among the big names that people try to claim are atheists. That's actually very rare that it actually got to that point. But people, you know how Nietzsche said God is dead? Do you know the other half of that statement? What's the rest of the statement? For we have killed him. It's not that there was a God that was a real God and now the God is dead. It's that we had a belief about God, and it was sort of the fundamental currency of our intellectual society. And now that's not really the case. I mean, even people that consider themselves religious, there's a part of you and I that we can't help because of the culture around us, that even if we're really people of faith, there's still a part of it that says, yeah, but what about really this, right? Isn't that true for almost everybody? Even if you really do believe in God. Well, that's troubling if you believe that somehow belief and knowledge are the same thing. And it's even more troubling if you think that the knowledge you have is somehow authoritative and durable and actual. I mean, we don't know. That's what this whole philosophical enterprise was. We don't know. Look at the facts that people marshal to try to prove one position or the other, like the whole notion of creation science. To call that science is a private definition of science. Plus, it's starting with already knowing which card you're going to pull out. When you know what you're going out to prove, whether it's evolution or it's creation, when you start with, I'm going there to prove that, and you manage to, oh, look, I pulled it out. You didn't do science.
Is that confirmation bias?
Of course it is, yes. Absolutely. Among other things. Oh, that one is a real blank, isn't it? That one we won't give you. All right. Some quality problems. I saw the end over here. Yes.
So wasn't that a dangerous thing you did when you said that Darwin was a theist? Like
I said that Darwin. Yes, he was a theist.
But then he wasn't really.
Well, to start out, he was actually not just a theist, he was a religious theist. He was a religious theist. Considered ministry, even.
So is he like one of the first examples of...
And by the way, he didn't come up with evolution. Evolution was from the pre-Socratics.
So a lot of people now are saying, like, he was spiritual. But he, like, what I think we were reading, like, spiritual people, but not religious.
Right.
So that's how...
But none of those things you just said are theological statements.
Okay.
You can be religious and be an atheist.
Yeah.
You can be spiritual and be an atheist. You don't have to believe in God to be religious. I have worked with pastors who really don't believe in God. They just, they know how long they have until they can retire. and they don't know how to do anything else.
So if the line between like what is known and what is not known is so blurred, why are many scientists choosing to believe that there isn't?
I don't know how many are, but I think most today in our country, probably not in a lot of countries, but in our country today and in much of Europe, I would say it's probably true. Culture. Because the Western scientific enterprise has a culture. And that's kind of like price of admission, because if you write in a paper that you leave open the idea that there's a God or that we were created, it's not going to get published. There's gatekeepers, there's editors, no one's going to review that positively.
I know a lot of the physicists believe in a God. The convention and stuff, and they're
Yes.
like thinking that it.
Yes, at the highest level today, people are going, well, there's something, right? There's something. We don't know what, but it's obvious that I got to show you something that what's his name, Neil Tyson deGrasse.
DeGrasse?
Huh?
DeGrasse?
Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was moderating a panel when a guy was on there saying, there's actually no possibility that this isn't a computer program, basically intentional. That this isn't programmed by an intelligent mind. There's no possibility. And the people there are saying, oh, they're giving them, and he's going, no, you're not looking at this at the level I'm looking at this. I mean, the math says this was programmed. And he explains how come that I'll look for that and see if we can put this here or put a link on the site for that. I could probably find it when I get internet back at home. Yes.
Is that what he argues intelligent design?
You know, I'm not sure that panel really raised that issue. And I haven't heard that particular physicist argue for intelligent design. I didn't think he was in favor of intelligent design. I think he's an atheist.
Yeah.
Well, he says he's agnostic.
I'm glad to hear that, because that's intellectually respectable. Think about what it means to say, I'm an atheist. My basic belief about the most important thing in the universe is that it doesn't exist. It's like here's what I do to get to my fundamental belief about potentially the most important thing in the universe. Source of it all, future of it all, the whole thing. I start by committing the fallacy of the universal negative. I'll look that up later. What?
Start by what?
Committing the fallacy. The universal negative is like this. Say that I lost my keys somewhere on campus. Okay? No, I lost somewhere today. And I'm not sure if I even had them today, but I might have. But I know I can't find keys, and I have some memory of having keys. It seems like I should have keys, but after that intramural accident, I'm not sure anymore. But I went all over the place. I went to the beach, I went to the mall, I went to the movies and everything. But I'm searching the campus, and what I do is part of the campus. And this is a lot like most of the rest of the campus. So I search it as representative. The keys are not here.